Marcus Reeves invited his ex-girlfriend to his wedding because he believed one thing with absolute confidence: that Zara Coleman was still the same woman he had left behind. In his mind, 3 years hadn't changed her much. Maybe she was still working late shifts somewhere in Nashville. Maybe still figuring things out the way she had been when they were together. He imagined her life had moved slowly, the way some lives do after a breakup when one person seems to move on faster than the other. So when he sent the invitation, it wasn't meant as cruelty exactly. Not in the obvious way. Marcus wasn't the type who thought of himself as cruel. He simply believed the story he had always told himself about Zara. And in that story, she had never quite caught up. The thing about Marcus Reeves is that he had always been good at believing the version of events that made him look reasonable. When he met Zara, she was working evening shifts at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place that tried to look upscale without quite managing it. Dim lights, expensive steaks, a long bar with businessmen who stayed longer than they planned. Zara had been there almost a year already. She took the job because she needed something steady while she figured out her next step. That was the phrase she used a lot back then, figuring things out. Marcus came in one Thursday night with 2 friends from his real estate office. He noticed Zara immediately because she didn't talk the way most servers did. She wasn't overly friendly. She wasn't performing politeness. She just did her job well and spoke clearly, like someone who expected to be listened to. When Marcus left that night, he wrote his number on the receipt. Zara almost threw it away. Her best friend Trish stopped her. Trish had known Zara since middle school and had a long history of convincing her to try things she normally wouldn't. "Just call him," Trish said. "What's the worst that happens?" Zara called him 2 days later. For the first few months, the relationship felt easy. Marcus was charming in the way that makes people feel temporarily chosen. He paid attention when she spoke. He asked questions about her plans, about the business classes she had started taking online at night. He liked telling people that his girlfriend was ambitious. Zara believed him. And in the beginning, there wasn't much reason not to. Marcus was 26, working in real estate sales, doing well enough that he carried himself like someone already on the way up. He had a decent apartment, a clean car, the kind of confidence that comes from being just successful enough to think things will continue that way. Zara was 24 and used to working harder than the people around her. She finished restaurant shifts at midnight and opened her laptop when she got home. She was taking online business courses, slowly building a foundation for something she didn't fully understand yet, but felt strongly about. Around that time, she met Dr. Patricia OAE through a mentorship program for young women in business. Dr. OAE ran a consulting firm in Nashville and had a reputation for noticing potential in people before they had the credentials to prove it. When Zara first met her, she was nervous. She expected the meeting to last 15 minutes. Instead, they talked for almost 2 hours. That conversation would eventually change the direction of Zara's life, but Marcus didn't see it that way when she told him about it. At first, he nodded politely. He said things like, "That's good," and "sounds interesting." But there was always a slight distance in his reaction, a quiet hesitation that Zara couldn't quite place. The first real crack appeared one night when Zara told him Dr. OAE had offered her the chance to work as a junior consultant. It wouldn't be paid at the beginning. It was an opportunity to learn how the business worked from the inside. Zara was excited when she explained it. Marcus listened with the expression of someone trying to stay supportive but failing. "You mean you'd be working for free?" he asked. Zara tried to explain that the experience mattered more than the paycheck right now. Marcus leaned back in his chair and shook his head slightly. "Zara, you're already working long hours at the restaurant. Why would you add something unpaid on top of that?" She said quietly, "Because it leads somewhere." Marcus gave a small laugh, not harsh exactly, but dismissive in a way that stayed in Zara's mind longer than he probably realized. "It might," he said, "but right now it just sounds like a hobby." That word landed harder than Marcus intended. Hobby. Zara didn't argue that night. She said she understood his concern. She even thanked him for being honest. But 2 weeks later, she accepted the consulting role anyway. She just didn't tell him right away. That was when the relationship began to change in ways neither of them fully acknowledged. Marcus started making small remarks that carried a different tone than before. When he picked her up after shift, he would wrinkle his nose slightly and joke that she smelled like the kitchen. When she talked about something she had learned in one of her courses, he sometimes nodded in a way that felt distracted, like he was waiting for the conversation to move on to something more interesting. Zara told herself she was imagining things. People go through phases in relationships. Stress changes how they talk to each other. She believed that explanation for longer than she probably should have. The real turning point came during a cookout one weekend at Marcus's friend's place. Zara had stepped away to help in the kitchen when she overheard Marcus talking outside with two of his friends. One of them asked how things were going with the waitress. Marcus laughed. "She's cute," he said, "but she's not really going anywhere." Zara didn't react in that moment. She finished helping in the kitchen and went back outside with the same calm expression she always had. But something inside her shifted quietly that night. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. The relationship didn't explode after that. There was no dramatic fight. Instead, it slowly unraveled in the quiet ways relationships often do when two people stop seeing each other clearly. Marcus grew busier with work. Zara grew busier with her consulting training. They started missing calls, canceling plans. A few months later, the breakup happened during a conversation that felt strangely calm. Marcus said they were heading in different directions. Zara said maybe he was right. And that was it. No shouting, no tears in front of each other. Just a clean ending that felt oddly unfinished. For a while after the breakup, Marcus didn't think much about Zara at all. His life continued moving forward at the pace he expected. About 6 months later, he met Brittany Simone Parks at a networking event. Brittany worked in marketing and came from a family with money and connections. She was confident in the way people often are when they've never had a question whether the future will work out. Marcus liked that. The relationship moved quickly. Within a year and a half, they were engaged. The wedding planning became a project in itself. Brittany's parents helped organize it. The venue was a large estate outside Nashville. The guest list grew to almost 400 people. Marcus enjoyed the attention more than he admitted out loud. Weddings like that have a way of turning into social events as much as personal ones. Friends talked about it weeks before it happened. Photos circulated online. Marcus found himself imagining how everything would look on the day itself. And somewhere during that planning process, a small thought entered his mind. It happened while he was scrolling through old contacts in his phone late one night. He saw Zara's name. For a moment, he wondered what she was doing now. He realized he had no idea. Then another thought followed quickly behind the first one. What if she came to the wedding? Not as a guest he wanted to reconnect with, more as a witness to the life he had built since they broke up. The idea felt harmless to him, almost generous, a gesture of closure. So Marcus sent the invitation. He didn't know that Zara no longer lived in the small apartment she had shared with a roommate when they were together. The envelope arrived at a high-rise building near downtown Nashville with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Zara opened it late in the afternoon after returning from a meeting. She read the names printed on the card slowly. Marcus Damon Reeves and Brittany Simone Parks. Then she set the invitation on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. After about a minute, she picked up her phone and called Trish. "You're not going to believe this," Zara said. On the other end of the line, Trish laughed once. "Please tell me that man did not invite you to his wedding." Zara looked down at the invitation again. "He did." There was a short silence. Then Trish said carefully, "Okay, so what are you going to do?" Zara didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and looked out over the city. 3 years earlier, she had cried on a kitchen floor because she thought the end of that relationship meant something about her future. Now, she felt something completely different. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet awareness of how far life had moved since then. Finally, she said, "I think I'm going to go." Trish laughed again, louder this time. "Oh my God, I need details." Zara smiled slightly. "Not because I'm trying to prove anything," she said. "I just want him to see that the story he told himself about me wasn't true." Trish was quiet for a second. "You know what?" she said. "I support this plan completely." What Zara didn't mention during that phone call was that someone else was sitting at the kitchen table listening to her side of the conversation. Elliot Fontaine had arrived 20 minutes earlier to review notes for a project they were working on together. Elliot was the founder of a private equity firm based in Atlanta that specialized in investing in minority-owned businesses. He was also the man who had spent the past year quietly becoming one of the most important people in Zara's life. When she finished the call, Elliot looked up from the documents spread across the table. "Everything okay?" he asked. Zara held up the invitation. "My ex is getting married." Elliot nodded slowly. "And he invited you?" "Yes." Elliot leaned back slightly in his chair. "Do you want to go?" Zara thought about it. Not long. Just enough to understand why the answer mattered to her. "I do," she said. Elliot considered that for a moment, then nodded once. "Then we go." And just like that, the next 6 weeks quietly began to take shape in a way Marcus Reeves could not possibly have imagined. And just like that, the next 6 weeks quietly began to take shape in a way Marcus Reeves could not possibly have imagined. But before those weeks unfolded, there were the 3 years Marcus never paid attention to. Because the truth is, the version of Zara that Marcus remembered had stopped existing long before the invitation arrived. When Zara and Marcus broke up, the silence that followed felt strange at first. Not dramatic, just unfamiliar. For 2 years, she had gotten used to someone texting her every morning, asking where she was, what she was doing, what time she would be off work. When that stopped, the space it left behind felt louder than any argument would have. The first few weeks after the breakup were messy in small, private ways. Zara slept badly. She worked longer shifts than she needed to. Some nights, she came home too tired to even open her laptop, which frustrated her more than anything Marcus had said. But something about the breakup also made a decision easier. She stopped trying to prove to Marcus that the consulting path mattered. Now there was no one to convince. Only the work itself. Dr. Oae noticed the shift almost immediately. About 2 months after the breakup, she called Zara into her office after a meeting with a client. "You're different lately," Dr. Oae said, leaning back in her chair. Zara thought about denying it, then decided not to. "Different how?" Dr. Oae smiled slightly. "More focused. Less worried about whether people approve of what you're doing." Zara shrugged. "Maybe I just have fewer people to explain things to now." Dr. Oae studied her for a moment, the way experienced mentors sometimes do when they're deciding whether someone is ready for the next level. Then she said something that would stay with Zara for years. "Good," she said simply, because explanation is usually wasted energy. Around that time, Zara started taking on more responsibility inside the consulting firm. At first, it was small things. Sitting in on meetings, preparing research summaries, watching how negotiations worked between executives who had spent decades learning how to dominate a room without raising their voices. Zara paid attention to everything. She noticed which arguments convinced people and which ones didn't. She noticed that most clients didn't respond to big speeches about values. They responded to numbers, to evidence, to the quiet confidence of someone who understood the problem better than they did. Within a year, she was no longer just preparing research. She was sitting at the table during presentations. Dr. Oae sometimes asked her to handle sections of the conversation directly. The first time it happened, Zara's voice shook slightly at the beginning. But by the end of the meeting, the room was listening. Afterward, one of the senior partners pulled Dr. Oae aside and said quietly, "She's good." Dr. Oae nodded. "I know." What Marcus didn't know during those same months was that Zara's income had started changing too. Consulting work can move slowly at first and then accelerate without warning once clients trust you. By the end of the second year, Zara was earning more in a month than Marcus had made in several months of real estate commissions. She never posted about it. She didn't talk about it online. She had grown up watching her mother handle difficult years quietly, with a kind of discipline that avoided drawing attention to progress too early. Zara followed the same instinct. Build first, talk later. Meanwhile, Marcus's life moved forward in a way that looked impressive from the outside. His relationship with Brittany became the center of his social life. Brittany was easy to be seen with. She was confident, polished, and came from a family that was already comfortable in the kind of social circles Marcus wanted to enter. Her father, Gerald Parks, had spent 35 years in investment banking and knew almost everyone in Nashville's business community. Marcus liked being introduced to those people. He liked being the man standing next to Brittany when conversations happened. Engagement came 18 months after they met. The proposal was planned carefully. Photos appeared online within hours. Friends commented enthusiastically. Marcus received the kind of congratulations that reinforced the feeling that life is unfolding exactly as expected. But even during that period, small pieces of information about Zara occasionally reached him through the same loose network of mutual acquaintances that connects most cities. Someone mentioned they had seen her speaking during a meeting with a large corporate client. Another person said she had moved into a new apartment building downtown. None of those updates sounded especially dramatic. People improve their careers all the time. Marcus filed the information away without thinking much about it. The story he already believed about Zara was too convenient to question. In his mind, she was still figuring things out, still on the edge of something that might or might not happen. That assumption stayed intact until the afternoon the wedding invitations were mailed. Marcus and Brittany sat at a long table going through the final stack of envelopes together. Brittany had been double-checking addresses while Marcus sealed them. It was Brittany who noticed the unfamiliar name first. "Who's Zara Coleman?" she asked, holding one of the envelopes between her fingers. Marcus looked up casually. "An old girlfriend." Brittany raised one eyebrow slightly. "You're inviting an old girlfriend to our wedding?" Marcus shrugged. "We ended on good terms." Brittany watched him for a second, the way people do when they sense there might be more to a story than the first answer provides. "You're sure that's not going to be awkward?" Marcus smiled easily. "Trust me, she probably won't even come." Brittany didn't argue, but she also didn't forget the name. Weeks later, when the invitation reached Zara's apartment and she made the decision to attend, the story began to move toward a moment no one involved had fully imagined yet. The first person Zara told after Trish was Dr. Oae. They were sitting in a small conference room reviewing notes from a client meeting when Zara mentioned it almost casually. "My ex is getting married," she said, "and he invited me." Dr. Oae looked up from the documents she was reading. "Are you going?" Zara nodded. Dr. Oae closed the folder slowly and leaned back in her chair. "Interesting." Zara laughed softly. "That's exactly what Trish said." Dr. Oae considered the situation for a moment, then asked a question that surprised Zara. "Why do you think he invited you?" Zara thought about it honestly. "Because he believes something about me that isn't true anymore." Dr. Oae's smile was small but approving. "Then perhaps it's time for him to update his information." Zara didn't say anything else about it after that. Instead, she focused on the work she and Elliot were doing together. Elliot Fontaine had entered her life during the second year after the breakup, when Dr. Oae introduced them at a business conference in Charlotte. Elliot had been invited to speak about investment strategies for minority-owned companies. Zara attended the session mostly out of curiosity. Afterward, Dr. Oae brought her over to meet him. Elliot's presence was different from most of the executives Zara had encountered. He wasn't loud. He didn't dominate conversations. But when he asked a question, people answered carefully. Within minutes of talking to Zara, he realized she understood the consulting side of the business better than many of the founders he funded. "You think like an operator," he told her that afternoon, "not just an advisor." Zara remembered laughing awkwardly at the time because she wasn't sure what he meant. Over the next year, their professional relationship grew naturally. Zara's consulting work often intersected with the types of companies Elliot invested in. Sometimes they collaborated on the same projects. Sometimes they simply compared notes about industries they both understood. Somewhere during those months, the connection between them shifted into something more personal. Neither of them rushed the transition. Both had busy lives. Both were cautious about mixing business and relationships. By the time Marcus's wedding invitation arrived, Zara and Elliot had already been quietly together for almost a year. When Zara told Elliot she planned to attend the wedding, his reaction remained exactly what it had been earlier that afternoon. Calm, curious, supportive without pushing. "If you want to go," he said again one evening while they were reviewing a contract proposal, "we'll go." Zara appreciated the simplicity of that response more than Elliot probably realized. Marcus had always wanted to debate her decisions. Elliot trusted her to make them. Over the next few weeks, the plan became clearer. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just intentional. Trish insisted on helping with the dress. "If you're walking into that wedding," she said, "you're doing it right." Zara laughed, but allowed herself to enjoy the process more than she expected. They found the dress after 2 days of searching. Deep burgundy, elegant without trying too hard. Elliot offered to drive them to the venue in his car, a matte black European supercar that tended to attract attention anywhere it went. Zara considered the idea briefly before shaking her head. "No," she said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it properly." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Zara smiled. "A limousine." Trish nearly fell off the couch laughing when she heard the plan. But within 24 hours, the reservation was made. During those same weeks, Marcus occasionally mentioned Zara's RSVP to his friends in casual conversation. Not directly bragging, just enough for the story to circulate. "My old girlfriend might show up," he told one of the groomsmen during a bachelor party. She finally responded yes. His friend laughed. "You serious?" Marcus shrugged. "Why not? No hard feelings." In Marcus's mind, the situation remained harmless, even slightly amusing. What he couldn't see yet was that the narrative he had built about Zara was about to collide with reality in a way that would make the next 45 minutes of his life feel longer than the previous 3 years combined. And that collision was already moving toward him 1 quiet mile at a time inside the back seat of a black limousine heading toward the wedding venue just outside Nashville. The limousine left downtown Nashville a little after 3 in the afternoon. Zara sat in the back seat beside Trish while Elliot faced them from the opposite side. None of them were talking much. Not because there was tension, but because the moment had a strange quietness to it. The kind that happens when something important is approaching but hasn't arrived yet. Outside the window, the city moved past slowly, buildings giving way to wider roads and neighborhoods that grew quieter the farther they drove. Trish broke the silence first. "Okay," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Before we get there, I need to ask you something." Zara looked at her. "What?" "On a scale of 1 to 10, how petty is this?" Zara laughed softly. "Honestly," Trish nodded. Zara thought for a second. "Maybe a 3. Trish stared at her. "A 3. Maybe a 4 if I'm being generous." Elliot smiled, but didn't interrupt. Trish shook her head. "Girl, you rented a limo to your ex-boyfriend's wedding." Zara leaned back into the seat. "No," she said calmly. "I rented a limo because I decided that if I'm showing up somewhere, I'm not showing up apologizing for existing." Trish paused, then slowly nodded. "Okay, that's fair." Elliot looked at Zara then. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Zara took a breath. "Honestly," Elliot nodded. "Curious." Trish laughed again. "Curious?" Zara shrugged slightly. "I want to see the look on his face when he realizes the story he told himself about me isn't real anymore." Elliot studied her for a moment, making sure there wasn't anger hiding underneath the calm. There wasn't. That was part of what he respected about her. Zara had already moved past the part of the story where revenge mattered. What she wanted now was something quieter. Closure, maybe, or confirmation that the work she had put into rebuilding her life had actually changed things. The limousine continued down the road for another 20 minutes before the venue came into view. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus and Brittany would choose, a renovated estate outside Nashville with wide lawns and white stone walls. Guests had already started arriving. Cars were parked along the curved driveway, and people stood in small groups near the entrance talking and checking their phones. The ceremony wasn't scheduled to start until 4, but most of the guests had been told to arrive early. Inside the main building, Marcus Reeves was standing with 2 of his groomsmen adjusting the sleeve of his jacket. Weddings have a strange energy right before they begin. Half excitement, half chaos. Marcus was enjoying it. People had been congratulating him all day. The photographer had already taken several rounds of pictures. His phone kept buzzing with messages from friends who were on their way. He checked the time. 3:12 p.m. One of his groomsmen, Deshaun, leaned against the table beside him. "You nervous?" Deshaun asked. Marcus shook his head. "Not really." Deshaun laughed. Man, you're about to get married in front of 400 people and you're not nervous? Marcus adjusted his tie. It's Brittany. I know what I'm getting into. Deshawn nodded slowly. Fair enough. A few seconds passed before Deshawn spoke again. Your ex coming? Marcus smiled slightly. Maybe. You actually invited her? Yeah. Deshawn laughed. That's wild. Marcus shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. We ended fine. Deshawn tilted his head slightly. You sure that's a good idea? Marcus waved the question away. Relax. It's not like she's going to cause a scene. At that exact moment, outside near the entrance to the estate, several guests turned their heads toward the driveway. The limousine had just appeared at the top of the hill. It moved slowly, almost silently, the long black body of the car gliding toward the front of the venue. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people watched it approach. It wasn't the loud party-style limousine people sometimes rent for bachelor parties. This one looked corporate, executive, the kind used for serious events. The driver pulled smoothly to a stop near the entrance and stepped out. Several guests glanced at each other. Who's that for? Someone whispered. The driver walked to the back door and opened it. Zara stepped out first. For a moment, the courtyard went completely quiet. Not because Zara was making a dramatic entrance. In fact, she moved calmly, almost casually, like someone stepping out of a car at any other event. But there was something about the way she carried herself now that made people look twice. Confidence is easy to recognize when it's real. Trish stepped out behind her, still adjusting her shoes. Then Elliot emerged from the other side of the car. He straightened his jacket and placed one hand lightly at the small of Zara's back as they started walking toward the entrance together. The murmuring began almost immediately. No one outside knew exactly who they were yet, but they knew enough to recognize that this was not an ordinary arrival. Inside the main hall, Deshawn had just stepped away to grab a drink when one of the event staff rushed past him toward the coordinator. Deshawn frowned slightly and wandered toward the entrance out of curiosity. He stopped when he saw the group walking up the path. It took him about 2 seconds to realize who it was. Deshawn blinked once, then turned around and walked quickly back inside. Marcus was still near the table, talking to another groomsman, when Deshawn appeared in the doorway. Marcus, he said. Marcus looked up. What? Deshawn hesitated. Your ex is here. Marcus smiled automatically. Yeah. Deshawn scratched the back of his neck. Yeah. Marcus waited for the rest. Deshawn took a breath. She looks different. Marcus laughed. Different how? Deshawn searched for the right word. Like money. Marcus frowned slightly. What does that mean? Deshawn shook his head. Just come look. Marcus followed him toward the doorway. When he stepped outside, he saw Zara almost immediately. She was walking across the courtyard with Elliot beside her, and Tricia stepped behind them. For a moment, Marcus didn't move. The first thing he noticed was how calm she looked. The second thing he noticed was the man walking next to her. Elliot Fontaine had the kind of presence that changes the atmosphere around him without effort. Not loud, not flashy, just composed in a way that made people pay attention. Marcus's eyes moved between the two of them, taking in the details quickly. The dress, the way Zara held herself, the quiet confidence of the man beside her. Something inside Marcus shifted slightly, though he couldn't have explained exactly what. It wasn't anger, not embarrassment either, more like confusion. The version of Zara he remembered didn't quite match the person walking toward the entrance now. Before Marcus could decide how to react, one of the wedding coordinators approached Zara politely. Welcome, she said. Are you here for the Reeves Parks wedding? Zara smiled. Yes. The coordinator glanced briefly at the guest list in her hand and nodded. Of course. Right this way. As Zara and Elliot followed her inside, Marcus stepped back from the doorway so they wouldn't immediately see him standing there. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Deshawn looked at him sideways. Bro, he said quietly. Who's the guy she's with? Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes were still fixed on the entrance as Zara disappeared in the hall. I don't know, he said finally. And for the first time since sending that invitation weeks earlier, Marcus Reeves began to feel the faint, uncomfortable sensation that the evening might not unfold the way he had imagined. Zara followed the wedding coordinator into the main hall, with Elliot walking beside her and Trish a step behind them. Inside the main hall, the atmosphere was exactly what you would expect before a large wedding ceremony. People were moving in clusters, greeting each other, checking phones, looking for their seats, making the kind of small talk that fills a room before something official begins. Conversations were light. Music was playing softly somewhere near the back of the hall. And then Zara walked in with Elliot and Trish. The change in energy was subtle but real. People didn't stop talking, but more heads turned than usual when the three of them crossed the room. Zara noticed it but didn't react to it. She had spent the last few years learning how to walk into rooms full of executives who were older and more experienced than she was. This felt easier than that. Trish leaned slightly closer to her and whispered, "Okay, I need you to know something." Zara glanced sideways. "What?" "Everyone is looking at you." Zara smiled faintly without turning her head. "Good," she said quietly. Elliot heard that and chuckled under his breath. They followed the coordinator to a table near the middle of the room. The seats were technically part of the general guest section, but the position made them visible from almost anywhere in the hall. As they sat down, Zara took a quick look around. She recognized a few faces from Marcus's old friend group, though most of them looked a little older now, a little more settled into their lives. None of them had noticed her clearly yet. Not up close. That would happen soon enough. Elliot leaned slightly toward her. "Still feeling curious?" he asked. Zara nodded once. "Very." Meanwhile, Marcus was standing just outside the main hall near the bar with Deshawn, trying to process what he had seen. His first instinct had been to act like nothing about Zara's arrival mattered. But the image of her walking beside Elliot kept replaying in his mind. Deshawn broke the silence first. "You sure you don't know that guy?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No." Deshawn nodded toward the hall. "Well, people inside are already asking." Marcus frowned. "Asking what?" "Who she came with." Marcus exhaled through his nose and picked up a glass from the bar. "Relax," he said. "It's probably just some guy she's dating." Deshawn shrugged. "Maybe," but even he didn't sound convinced. Back inside the hall, the first wave of recognition had started spreading quietly through the room. One of Marcus's old co-workers leaned toward another guest. "Is that Zara?" The other man looked over, squinting slightly. "Wait, Marcus's ex?" "Yeah, that's her." They both glanced again at the table where Zara was sitting with Elliot. "She looks different." Another guest leaned in. "Who's the guy she's with?" No one at that table knew the answer yet, but speculation started the way it always does at events like this. Quiet comments, curious glances, little pieces of conversation moving from one group to another. At the head table, Brittany was finishing a quick conversation with one of her bridesmaids when she noticed the shift in attention around the room. She followed a few people's line of sight until her eyes landed on Zara. For a moment, Brittany simply observed. She had heard Marcus mention the name before, but hearing a name and seeing a person are two different things. Brittany studied Zara calmly. Then she noticed Elliot sitting beside her. Something about his presence registered immediately. Brittany had grown up around successful people. You learn to recognize certain signals without needing introductions. The way someone sits, the way others react to them without realizing they're reacting. Elliot had that kind of quiet gravity. Brittany leaned toward Marcus's sister who was standing beside her. "Is it the ex Marcus mentioned?" she asked quietly. Marcus's sister followed her gaze. "Yeah," she said after a second. "That's Zara." Brittany nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else, but she kept watching the table for a few seconds longer than necessary. About 10 minutes later, Marcus finally walked back into the hall. The moment he entered, he could feel the shift in attention more clearly. A few people glanced at him, then towards Zara's table, then back again. That kind of subtle social movement is hard to miss if you know what to look for. Marcus followed their gaze. Zara saw him at almost the exact same moment. Their eyes met across the room for the first time in 3 years. Neither of them reacted dramatically. Marcus gave a small, polite smile and started walking toward her table. Trish saw him coming first. "Incoming," she muttered quietly. Zara picked up her glass of water and took a calm sip. Elliot leaned back slightly in his chair, relaxed. Marcus stopped at the edge of the table. For a moment, he simply looked at Zara, try to reconcile the person in front of him with a memory he had carried for years. Then he smiled. "Zara," he said. Zara returned the smile politely. "Marcus." There was a short pause that neither of them rushed to fill. Marcus glanced briefly at Elliot before looking back at Zara. "I'm glad you came." Zara nodded. "Congratulations," she said. "It's a beautiful wedding." Marcus smiled again, though this one was slightly tighter. "Thank you." Then he gestured toward Elliot. "You brought someone." Elliot stood and extended his hand smoothly. "Elliot Fontaine," he said. "Congratulations on the wedding." Marcus shook his hand. Elliot's grip was firm but unhurried, the kind of handshake people give when they're used to meeting strangers in important rooms. "Marcus Reeves," Marcus replied. "Nice to meet you." Something about the exchange made Marcus feel briefly like he had stepped into a conversation where he didn't yet understand the rules. Elliot sat back down calmly. Marcus turned his attention back to Zara. "So," he said casually, "how have you been?" Zara answered simply, "I've been great." Marcus nodded. "Still doing the consulting thing?" Zara smiled slightly. "Still doing it." "That's good," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what that meant anymore. For a moment, he seemed to search for the version of the conversation he had imagined having weeks earlier. The one where he would politely reassure Zara that everything had worked out for the best. But something about her calm confidence made that script harder to follow. Zara watched him with an expression that was warm but unreadable. Marcus cleared his throat lightly. "Well," he said, "I should get back before Brittany sends someone looking for me." Zara nodded. "Of course." Marcus hesitated 1 second longer, then stepped away from the table. As he walked back toward the head section of the hall, he could feel several people watching him. Deshawn intercepted him halfway across the room. "Well?" Deshawn asked quietly. Marcus shrugged. "She seems good." Deshawn tilted his head slightly. "You find out who the guy is?" Marcus shook his head. "No." Deshawn glanced across the room again. "You might want to." Marcus followed his gaze. Elliot was leaning toward Zara, saying something quietly that made her laugh. It was an easy, relaxed moment between two people who clearly knew each other well. Marcus felt that faint, uncomfortable sensation again. The ceremony began about 15 minutes later. Guests moved into their seats while the music shifted and the wedding coordinator guided everyone through the process. Zara sat calmly through the ceremony beside Elliot and Trish. She watched Marcus and Brittany exchange vows the same way she would watch any couple getting married, with quiet respect but without any emotional weight tied to it anymore. For Zara, the real moment of the evening wasn't the ceremony. It came later during the reception when the speeches began. The first few speeches followed the usual pattern. Marcus's best man told a series of stories from their college years that made half the room laugh. Brittany's maid of honor spoke about their friendship growing up. Then Brittany's father stood up with the microphone. Gerald Parks was 61 years old and carried himself with the steady confidence of someone who had spent decades in boardrooms where every sentence mattered. He spoke warmly about his daughter at first, about family, about the hopes he had for the marriage. The room listened respectfully. And then, about halfway through his speech, Gerald paused and looked across the room toward Zara's table. "I also noticed," he said calmly, "that someone whose work I've admired for quite some time is with us this evening." The room grew quieter. Gerald smiled slightly. "Mr. Elliot Fontaine," he continued, "I believe you're here tonight." Several heads turned instantly toward Zara's table. Elliot looked mildly surprised, but raised a polite hand in acknowledgement. Gerald nodded. "I've followed your firm's work for years. I hope we have the chance to speak later this evening." The reaction in the room happened almost instantly. People who recognized the name reacted first. Others noticed their reaction and followed their gaze. Conversations shifted. Phones came out briefly as a few guests searched the name. At the head table, Marcus froze with his champagne glass halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered it. Deshawn leaned closer and whispered, "Bro, that's the guy she came with." Marcus didn't answer. Across the room, Zara sat calmly beside Elliot as the quiet wave of realization spread through the hall. And for the first time since sending that wedding invitation weeks earlier, Marcus Reeves understood something he had not considered before. The story he believed about Zara might not just be incomplete. It might be completely wrong. The rest of the reception moved forward the way large weddings always do. Music, conversation, the slow rhythm of people standing up, sitting down, laughing at things that would probably sound less funny tomorrow. But something had changed in the room after Gerald Parks mentioned Elliot's name. Not dramatically, just enough that Marcus could feel it. It was the same subtle shift Zara had noticed earlier when she first walked in. The difference now was that Marcus was the one standing in the middle of it. People didn't treat him differently. They still congratulated him, still shook his hand, still raised glasses when he passed by. But every few minutes someone would casually glance toward the table where Zara and Elliot were sitting. Marcus noticed every one of those glances. Deshawn noticed them too. At one point he leaned toward Marcus and said quietly, "You really didn't know who that guy was?" Marcus kept his eyes on the dance floor where Brittany was talking with a group of relatives. "No," he said. Deshawn nodded slowly. "Man owns a private equity firm in Atlanta. My cousin works in finance." He recognized the name immediately. Marcus didn't respond. For the first time that evening, he felt something close to irritation. Not at Zara, not even at Elliot. More at himself for not knowing the answer to a question that now seemed obvious. Across the room, Zara was talking quietly with Elliot and Trish while the band set up for the next round of music. Trish leaned toward Zara and whispered, "Okay, I need to ask, are we having fun yet?" Zara smiled slightly. "I told you I was curious." Elliot glanced at her, and Zara took a sip of her drink and looked across the room toward Marcus for a moment. "And I think the curiosity part is over." Elliot followed her gaze briefly, but didn't comment. He didn't need to. The situation had already revealed everything it needed to. The next hour passed quickly. Dinner was served. Guests moved between tables. The band started playing again, and the dance floor filled with people who had already had enough champagne to stop worrying about how they looked. Marcus moved through the reception the way a groom is expected to move, greeting people, thanking relatives for coming, posing for photos when the photographer asked. But every so often his attention drifted back to the same place. Zara's table. She looked comfortable there. Not like someone trying to prove anything, just like someone attending an event. That detail bothered him more than he expected. Eventually, the evening began winding down. Some guests had already left. Others were gathering near the bar for one last round of drinks before heading home. Marcus stepped outside onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. The air was cooler now, and the noise from the reception hall sounded distant behind the closed doors. He stood there for a minute, leaning lightly against the railing, replaying pieces of the night in his head. The limousine, Elliot's handshake, Gerald Parks mentioning his name. The calm way Zara had answered his questions earlier. None of it fit neatly with the version of her he had carried around for the past 3 years. He was still thinking about that when the door behind him opened. Marcus turned slightly. Zara stepped out onto the balcony. She paused when she saw him there. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't realize anyone was out here." Marcus shook his head. "It's fine." Zara walked a few steps toward the railing and picked up a light wrap she had left on one of the chairs earlier. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus said quietly, "I made a mistake." Zara looked at him. "What kind of mistake?" Marcus hesitated. It wasn't a sentence he had planned to say out loud. But now that it had started, the rest came out before he could stop it. "I thought you weren't going anywhere." Zara watched him for a few seconds. Not angry, not triumphant, just thoughtful. Finally, she said, "Marcus, you didn't see me." Marcus frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Zara folded the wrap over her arm. "You never really looked," she said calmly. The sentence landed with a strange clarity. Not dramatic, just honest. Marcus started to respond, but stopped when he realized he didn't actually have an argument ready. Zara didn't wait for one. "I hope you're happy," she added quietly. "I mean that." And she turned and walked back inside the reception hall. Marcus stayed on the balcony a little longer. The music from inside grew louder again when someone opened the door briefly, then quiet once more when it closed. He stood there staring out across the dark lawn, trying to understand exactly when the story he had believed about Zara stopped being true. The answer, of course, was that the story had never been accurate in the first place. Zara returned to the table where Elliot and Trish were waiting. Trish looked up immediately. "Well," Zara sat down and reached for her glass. "He said he made a mistake." Trish leaned forward, and Zara shrugged lightly. "I told him he never really saw me." Trish covered her mouth with one hand, half laughing. "That's cold." Zara shook her head. "No, just honest." Elliot watched her quietly for a moment. "You okay?" Zara nodded. "More than okay." A few minutes later, they stood to leave. The drive back to Nashville was quieter than the drive there had been. Trish eventually rested her head against the window and dozed off. Elliot answered one quick phone call about a project and then set his phone aside. Zara looked out the window at the lights of the city slowly appearing on the horizon. She expected to feel something dramatic after the night was over. Relief, satisfaction, maybe even a little bit of triumph. Instead, what she felt was something much simpler, the feeling of a chapter closing. Not because she forced it closed, but because she had grown past the place where it began. In the months that followed, life continued moving forward in the same quiet direction it had already been heading. Zara and Elliot made their relationship public a few months later with a single photo from a short trip to Barbados. No big announcement, just a picture and a caption that made sense to the people who mattered. Professionally, things moved even faster. Elliot's investment firm and Zara's consulting work had already been overlapping. Eventually, they turned that overlap into a formal partnership focused on supporting businesses founded by Black women. Within the first year, they had 14 companies working with them and several investors asking to join the initiative. Zara started appearing at conferences more often. 2 business magazines featured her work. She bought a house in a neighborhood she used to drive through just to admire the architecture. Occasionally, she still heard small updates about Marcus through the same loose network of mutual acquaintances. His marriage to Brittany had become more complicated than the wedding photos suggested. He had changed jobs twice. Nothing dramatic, just the normal turbulence of 2 people realizing that the version of life they expected doesn't always unfold the way they imagined. Zara never felt angry when she heard those updates. Mostly she felt a quiet kind of distance from the entire situation. The moment that stayed with her most from that year didn't involve the wedding at all. It happened months later on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Zara was sitting at her desk reviewing a proposal for a new client while sunlight came through the windows of her office. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elliot, something small and funny he had seen earlier that day. She laughed, typed a quick reply, and went back to reading the proposal. And as she worked, she had a simple thought that made her smile again. The real victory had never been that wedding night. The real victory was this: a quiet life she had built herself. A life where no one's opinion about her future mattered more than the work she was doing to create it. And the truth Marcus Reeves had finally understood too late was something Zara had learned years earlier. The most dangerous mistake you can make about another person is believing you already know who they are becoming. Because sometimes the version of them you leave behind is only the beginning of the story.